Welcome back to another video, guys, and in this one we are going to make a tent peg out of a piece of wood. So welcome back, guys. Thank you once again for joining me back out here in the woods. First of all, I want to address a couple of things. So I want to apologise for there not being a video last week. Just didn't have the time to get that sorted, and also I have switched my upload schedule back to Sunday uploads as it used to be. I switched to Wednesday a few months ago to see whether that would work any better, and it hasn't, so I'm switching back to Sunday uploads, so videos will be out on Sundays as much as possible every week. So yeah, that's that little bit of admin out the way, so let's get straight back into the video. So what I want to look at today is another little bit of green woodworking. So we looked at some pot hanger systems before, but I thought we could go ahead and take a look at another fundamental skill, which is being able to make a tent peg. Now, what I have got here is a bit of green willow, and I was originally going to use this end, but when I was sawing off a piece, it split, so we're not going to be able to use that end, so we're going to use the thinner end. So why are we wanting to use green wood? Well, for tent pegs, they don't necessarily need to be green. When we were doing our pot hangers, we were using green wood because we don't want it to burn around our fire. But when we're doing pot hangers, it's less important. It's not pot hangers, tent pegs and pegs. We don't necessarily need it to be green. We can get away with dead wood, providing that it is still intact and strong and not rotting. But green is easier to work with and will last longer. So we're going to be using this top section. Now, this piece isn't overly straight, but it is perfectly straight enough to do what we need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off our length here, and I'm going to cut it off actually quite long to about here somewhere, and we're just going to use the old Laplander, using our log here. We can just cut off our piece like so, and we'll keep our other bit nice and handy. So with our piece here, that's about the length from my forearm, from my fingertips to my elbow. And where I live, a lot of our ground is very soft. Certainly this woodland is very soft, so having a longer tent peg can be helpful. Also having a thicker tent peg to an extent, but actually a longer tent peg, because it means we can drive it further into the ground and get it down into that slightly firmer soil, and it will work better. So basically what we're going to need to do is put a point on one end and put some kind of notch in the other end. Now, if you watched that pot hanger video, and I'll leave a link up here and in the description, I ran through how to do a beak notch and how to do a 7 notch, and that is exactly the notches we're going to use in this video. So we will run through it briefly here, but go check that video out if you want to learn more. And also we might want to bevel the top and things like that. So first of all, I'm just going to take my knife, and just using the TBS bore, and I'm just going to clean up this top, because where I've sawn it off, it is not particularly clean. So just clean that off. Remember, always working with a sharp knife. So looking at our piece, we need to decide which is going to be the top and which is going to be the bottom. So this end's thicker, and this end is thinner. Now, I have seen quite a lot actually, people tend to want, oh, need a nice chunky thick spiked point. No, we want to be putting our spike on our small end, because when we come to hit this into the ground, if we're hitting the thin end, smaller surface area and more likely to break out and not survive. So we want to put our spike on our thin end. It's also actually easier to put it into. So we're going to put a three-sided spike onto our piece here. So we don't want a really sharp point. We want a fairly shallow point, because a sharp point will break easier. So to talk about knife safety a little bit while we're here, a lot of people won't like the way that I am sitting. I'm sitting with my legs in front with my arms on my legs. Now, a lot of people don't like that because obviously the inside of the leg, we've got arteries that run down our legs, the femoral artery, for example, and if we nick that with our knife, the chances are we won't survive when we're out in the woods, because by the time emergency services get to you, you will have lost a lot of blood. Of course, I do have a first aid kit with me, and that is very important, but still probably won't be able to stop the bleeding enough. So we don't want to be working here in our groin area, in between our legs. So I've seen a lot of people that don't like folk working like this. Now, for me, when I'm working by myself, I don't mind this position. The concern is that when we're working, we slowly work back and we end up here without noticing. That tends to happen more in social situations when you're here, oh, you have a conversation with someone and then you're straight back in and you don't lean forward again. When I'm by myself, I'm constantly thinking about my safety and where the knife is going to go. So the knife is always going forward. I'm never doing a pull cut down here. I'm never coming anywhere near. If you are concerned, we can do to the side, which again is safer because the knife is going away from us. And if you are in a social situation, make sure you are, separated enough so that at full arm's reach, if someone was sitting right here beside me and I swing that way, I'm going to hit them. We don't want that. But of course we can also do things like chest lever, which we're putting a spike on, is actually quite a good cut. There's a bit of a knot there, so just swing through that. So just when we're practicing bushcraft, safety should be one of our top priorities at all times. We're using sharp tools. We're in a vulnerable location. We're not easily accessible by help, in particular the emergency services. So just being conscious of what we're doing. At all times. Some people prefer to use a glove when they're cutting using a knife. I don't. I find I have more control without it, and I'd rather have control and the ability to prevent myself cutting myself by having control than having a glove do that job when I cut myself. So I'm just kind of flattening this point out a little bit here because it's a little bit too sharp, so we're just going to take the tip off of that really. As I say, we're working in quite soft soil in my area, so, and tent pegs don't have to be aesthetically pleasing, so that would definitely work just the way it is. But bushcraft is all about finesse, and it's about taking our time, getting things right, and to an extent making things look good. And making a tent peg is one of those skills that just learn it. It's a really basic fundamental skill. It's one of the first woodwork projects that you can teach and all of that. So now that we've got our spike, we want to be putting in our notches, and we have two options for notches. We can do a simple 7 notch or L notch or standard notch, which is just a stop cut with a cut up to it, or we can do a beak notch. So we're going to start with the stop cut, and we need to think about where the flat side of our stop cut is going to be, and when we're doing a tent peg, it's got to be at the top. So all I'm going to do, place my knife, the belly of my knife across the piece of wood, and baton using another stick into our piece, and we're going to cut up towards it, nice and gently. We don't want to push too hard because we might break off our stop cut, and we don't want to do that. We want to make it reasonably deep because it needs to capture our line, and obviously depending on the size of your cordage, if you're using a full-on rope, you're going to potentially need a bigger notch than if you're using, say, bank line or paracord. And there it is, as simple as that, to put our little 7 notch, and that would go in and work totally fine. Now, we want to put a little bit more effort in and do a slightly more elaborate thing. We can do a beak notch, and again, check out that previous video for how to do this in detail. But rather than doing a straight cross cut, we do a diagonal. We do 2 diagonal cross cuts, creating an X shape. Make sure we get the angles right. And then again, we're simply cutting up towards the top of that stop X. Now in this case I'm working back upright, even though I've said not to, but that's because I'm not working down here. I'm working up here, and I'm working quite close to my face, some might say, but I'm cutting in such a way that it's not going to cut towards me, and it's because I'm trying to be accurate. So I'm looking closely at what I'm doing. And everyone has their own little ways of doing things. When I'm doing beak notches, this is quite often where I'll work. It's pinned against my leg at the bottom, so the piece is nice and stable, the knife is moving. Now, this probably looks incredibly dangerous because I'm pulling the knife towards my chest, but I'm not applying any pressure right now. I am just gently scoring what I'm doing. I am not forcing the knife. So if when it slips off the end of the wood, it's just gravity. It's not going to cut through clothing. And as always with a beak notch, there should be no undercutting of the actual beak. It should do it itself in the process. So, yeah, and of course you've got to remember with this, compared to a pot hanger, although that would actually be quite a good pot hanging beak notch, it doesn't need to be quite as substantial because again it's just going to be holding cord. And in all fairness, a beak notch for a tent peg is excessive. It's not needed. A simple 7 notch will work perfectly fine. So now the only thing left to do, in my opinion for now, is to put the bevel on the top, because when we hit it, if we hit it right now, what's going to happen is it's going to mushroom out and it's going to break those fibres. So all we want to do is just cut an angle around the top, and that just, it keeps those fibres and that shock wave when you hit it running down. Now that's a simple bevel. What I then like to do is come back and take off the angles, the sharp ones, and make slightly smaller little angles around the way, because again, finesse. And then I also like to put a little micro bevel on that top edge. So you cut the angle off and then put another angle just at the top, a really tiny one, just to take that extra edge off, and that just makes the edge even smaller, and we can just clean up the top itself. We want to make that top flat and just tidy that up, and there we go, a very simple tent peg. Now You can take the bark off of these, and if I was making a tent peg for a permanent situation, like if I was creating a set of tent pegs to go in my tarp, one, they wouldn't be this big because I wouldn't be carrying this much around with me, but that's just for the demonstration. But if I was going to be making a permanent tent peg, what I would be doing is I would be taking the bark off, because it means it's going to preserve it in the ground more. Whereas with the bark on, bugs and stuff can get inside and it's not so good. But actually aesthetically they tend to look better with the bark on, because you can kind of see those cuts more in detail. And I'm actually going to keep this tent peg as a demonstration model for teaching with, so I'm going to keep the bark on, and that way it's clear where my cuts are and what the cuts are, because it's easier to see that internal wood tone comparatively. So that's a very basic tent peg, and as I said earlier, tent pegs are probably, in my opinion, one of the really fundamental skills that is a really good one to learn. You're learning, in my eyes, 4 different techniques there. You're learning to bevel the top of a piece, you're learning to put a spike on it, and you're learning 2 types of notches in that one stick alone. Not to mention that if you also include the sawing of the piece of wood, you're using a baton to do stop cuts and all sorts of little things just from that one tent peg. And you could technically turn a tent peg into a little bit of a tri-stick as well. So yeah, tent pegs, really fundamental skill, and it's a really good one for practicing up your skills and learning them, and maintaining your knife skills. I said skills quite a lot there. But of course, some tips with it. Again, green wood, if you're a beginner and you're learning to do it, start with green wood. It is far easier. Don't go for ridiculously big stuff. You see people making tent pegs out of massive pieces of wood. That's fine, but with a simple bushcraft knife, you're going to struggle, especially if it's dead. If you're using dead wood, try and keep it thin, but not so thin. Something around this size. So this is, I don't know, maybe 1 inch in diameter here. That is ideal for a tent peg. That is more than enough. It keeps the weight quite low. It's manageable, and with just a knife, because obviously you can do some of this with an axe, you can put the spike on with an axe, you can bevel it with an axe. But if all you've got is a knife and you only need a knife, keeping it small is helpful. Make sure your knife is nice and sharp. Of course, have a first aid kit with you. If you want to use gloves, you can. Make sure to keep the piece nice and still and move the knife. And of course, take your time, give it some finesse. Do not rush things, and and really take your time. And just to show you up close there, that is the 2 notches. So you've got our beak notch and our 7 notch spike at that end, and a nice bevel at that end. And that is, as I say, that is a basic tent peg. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like down below. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing as well. Leave a comment of what you want to see next time, and until then, bye for now.